Hi, this is Gail Sokol, and on today's show, we're going to be discussing frozen desserts.
Welcome to Baking Radio. Learn the art and science of baking with author, educator, and award-winning chef, Gail Sokol. Whether you've been baking your whole life or you're brand new to the world of baking and you're looking to build your confidence and learn new skills in the kitchen, you're in the right place. This is Baking Radio.
On today's show, I thought it might be fun to go over frozen desserts and really all the different types that you could actually make. And I know this is baking radio, and I know I'm into baking, but frozen desserts, although they have nothing to do with the world of baking, they go very nicely with baked goods, and they're very complementary to them. So that's why I really feel the need to discuss them. And I put so many great recipes for frozen desserts, both in my first book about professional baking, which is being used all over the world. And it's a fabulous learning book about frozen desserts. And my second book, Baking with Success, which is available also worldwide and on an ebook. So if you're very interested in some fabulous award-winning recipes, they're there. There are two basic types of frozen desserts. One is called churn frozen, and one is called still frozen. And let's go into each one individually. So churn frozen desserts are constantly moving while they're being frozen. And the reason that they're in motion throughout the freezing process is to prevent large ice crystals from forming. Small ice crystals actually feel better on your tongue. They give a creamier texture and a better mouthfeel. So we really, I think we as consumers and we as eaters of ice cream or other frozen desserts, we like things to be creamy. And smaller ice crystals will do that. Churn frozen desserts need an ice cream machine or an ice cream maker to freeze the base. And we'll talk more about the base later. It's usually a custard base, but it can be other things as well. Some ice cream machines are powered by humans, so humanly cranking them like an old-fashioned ice cream machine that uses ice, salt, and water to actually depress the freezing point of water so that you get this super cold, icy concoction that will freeze the ice cream base in a matter of minutes. Some are powered electrically, and you can make ice cream now in less than 30 minutes. Some machines, probably less than that. Very, very easy to make. And a lot of restaurants are now making them homemade in the restaurant themselves, in-house. So very often there is an insulated freezer bowl that comes with an ice cream maker. Maybe some of you have an ice cream maker. They're very easy to use. And they come with certain brands of ice cream makers, these insulated bowls, but they must be kept in the freezer overnight. So if you think you want to make ice cream tomorrow, put your bowl, your insulated freezer bowl, into the freezer the night before. You can even purchase an extra bowl to keep in your freezer just in case you want to make ice cream at a moment's notice. And believe it or not, I cannot lie. I do have an extra insulated freezer bowl in my freezer as we speak because I never know when I want to make ice cream. And sometimes I do and I don't want to wait. So I will always keep one in there. So I do have that second bowl. Most churn frozen desserts begin with a base of some sort, like I said before, a base. It can be a custard base. It can even be a fruit base. The incorporation of air into that custard through the churning process is why different brands of ice cream have differing textures. So if you were to be on a test panel, a tasting panel of all different types and brands of ice creams, you would notice this. You would notice that some ice creams are denser, some ice creams are fluffier, and this is because of the incorporation of air through that churning process. And each brand has a different amount of air in each one. So some brands contain a lot of air, and they are almost fluffy, like a marshmallow fluffy texture. The increase in volume due to the incorporation of air is referred to as overrun. Overrun. This is an industry term that ice cream makers use. So all churn frozen desserts have a certain amount of overrun, this increase in volume due to that incorporation of air. So that's why some ice creams are fluffy. And I don't really like my ice cream fluffy. So I'm sort of taking a certain tone when I say the word fluffy. And they're said to have a higher percentage of overrun. Some ice creams are more dense and have a richer texture and mouthfeel, and they're said to have a lower percentage of overrun. Churn frozen desserts include desserts like ice creams, frozen yogurts, gelatos, sorbets, and sherbets. Okay. So still frozen desserts, while they're being frozen, they are still, they lay still. They do not get churned. They're just frozen. You just put them in the freezer as they are, and they lie there. Still frozen desserts may include something known as a Semifreddo, which are fabulous. And we'll go into what they are another time. Frozen soufflés and mousses. I have a great Semifreddo, like a half chocolate, half dark chocolate Semifreddo in my first book about professional baking. And it's fabulous. So if you're interested, you can reach out and get that book. It's available worldwide. So still frozen desserts. How are they lightened? How do we eat them? Well, they're lightened in texture with the addition of things like egg foams or meringues. Well, on previous shows, I've talked about egg foams and meringues. So, if you want to read, listen more about the details of egg foams and meringues, go to a previous show. And they also may include whipped cream. Again, the air in these two things, the egg foam or the meringue and the whipped cream, is actually the reason we don't need to churn them. They have air in them, and then we just allow them to freeze. Let's have a general discussion about a few of the different kinds of frozen desserts that we love so much. And I'm going to explain to you what each one of them really is comprised of and composed of. So ice cream. I'm going to start with ice cream because it's by far one of the most loved desserts, frozen desserts ever, I think worldwide. And it's one of the richest of any frozen dessert you can have. Ice creams in general are made from a custard base, and it usually contains rich dairy products. And they can include heavy cream, half and half, whole milk, combination of those three, and usually eggs are included. Now, sometimes the whole egg is included, the egg and the yolk, the white and the yolk, and sometimes it's just the yolks. Sugar's also added, and along with many, many different types of flavorings. Sometimes, like I said, there's a mixture of dairy products, not just one, because if it was all heavy cream, sometimes it's too rich, but it can be a combo. The base can be cooked as a stovetop custard. Remember, I did a previous show on stovetop custards made without a starch. Well, this is what we talked about, something called a crème anglaise. And a crème anglaise is a base for a rich ice cream. So you could take that crème anglaise recipe I gave you in that previous show on stovetop custards made without a starch and freeze it in an ice cream maker, and you would have ice cream. And it really is that simple. Or you can also make an ice cream base with something that is uncooked. And sometimes the eggs are not cooked and they're just frozen directly. If you're not worried about salmonella in your area, you can do this. I have made uncooked bases as well, very successfully. But if you are, worried about salmonella in your area, I recommend you use a pasteurized egg product. Either way, the base, in order to put it in your ice cream machine, must be cold. I actually had a friend many years ago. She was making ice cream for the first time, and she didn't wait. She made a cooked custard, right, without a starch. She put it right into the ice cream machine, and it never froze. And she called up. She was actually crying. She was literally beside herself. What did I do wrong? And I said, you didn't let it get cold. Things that are warm are not going to freeze properly. So you really need to let it get ice cold. And we're going to talk more about that another time. So make sure that your base, whatever it's uncooked or cooked, make sure it's really, really ice cold or it won't freeze. So I leave it in the refrigerator. The day I make it, I leave it in the refrigerator for several hours overnight. Or if I'm really desperate for ice cream that day, I put it in a ice water bath. So just fill up a nice big bowl with a half full of ice, put some water in it, and just put your bowl of your creme anglaise in there, stir it until it's nice and cold, and then you can put it in your ice cream machine. So let's talk about another ice cream, another Italian style ice cream that we all recognize as gelato. Typically, gelatos have no eggs, but some recipes can. So again, when somebody says, oh, this never has eggs, there may be an exception. But typically, gelatos tend to not have eggs. They tend to be denser than an American style ice cream. So they have less overrun. Remember that term? So in Italian, gelato means frozen. And they usually contain whole milk, more whole milk than cream, typically. They also contain sugar and flavorings, and they also contain fruits and nut purees. So you can have fabulous hazelnut gelatos and pistachio gelatos because they're made from these nut purees. And then it's churned at a slower rate than an American style ice cream. So there is less air and less volume from it or less overrun. Again, it's denser. It's a little bit denser. Let's talk about another frozen dessert, sorbet. Sorbet we all love, right? And sorbets typically contain no dairy whatsoever. They tend to be made with a fruit base. It usually contains pureed fruit, a fruit juice, and a sugar syrup. And it's very important that the more sugar you have in the sugar syrup, the less dense the sorbet will be, because things that are super sugary are not going to freeze like an ice cube. If you take water without any sugar in it and you put a glass of water in the freezer, it will freeze rock hard. And we don't want our sorbets rock hard. But if you add some other ingredients like sugar, the sugar granules will come in between the ice crystals and prevent them from joining up and making larger ice crystals and therefore a big block of ice. So the more or the heavy duty your sugar syrup is, the less likely it's going to freeze hard as a rock. So sorbets make a wonderful, refreshing dessert. Some people like to just serve them with some fresh fruit or as an accompaniment to a cake. And in very fancy restaurants, maybe you've been in some restaurants where you get like a palate cleanser or an in-between course, also known as an intermezzo. And I found this interesting trivia. I always find this is fun. And if I ever know some interesting trivia, I really want to tell you because it's sort of fun. Intermezzo was the comic relief during operas between, the heavy duty, death scenes and, very dramatic scenes in operas. So the intermezzo was sort of a comic little, spell of comedy. And basically that is what an intermezzo is. So sorbets are a palate refresher. In between courses, you're given a small amount of sorbet. It's usually a tiny little ball of it in a tiny little glass with a tiny little spoon. And it can come in many different flavors. I've had usually a lot of fruit-based sorbets that can be anything from, green apple to raspberry to lemon. And it's a palate cleanser. It's something that makes your palate, refreshes your palate so you can go on bravely to the next course in your meal. Okay. They can be flavored, like I said before, using fruit as a base, but they can also have some liqueur in them or even sparkling wine. That sounds good, right? And that would make a really nice, refreshing dessert with some fresh fruit. So now let's move on to our last type of frozen dessert known as a sherbet. So sherbets, I used to call them sherbets with an R in there when I was a kid, but it's sherbet. And sherbets contain fruit juices, sugar, and water. They can also contain milk, but never cream. Sometimes only a tiny little bit of heavy cream, but not much. And sometimes they can even contain egg whites. And recipes vary. So sherbet can also be a very nice, a little bit heavier than a sorbet, but it can be a really nice dessert as well with fresh fruit. Or to accompany a nice pound cake or an angel food cake, something like that. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to leave a review, I would greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, head on over to bakingradio.com and leave me a message. I would love to answer some of your questions on air. And next show, we're actually going to be making ice cream.